Welcome to Debt Free in 30, where every week we talk to industry experts about debt, money, and personal finance. Let's play a word association game. Let's pretend that you have debts and you're behind on your payments. What words come to mind? For many people, it's the words collection agent or bill collector. As frequent listeners to this show know, my name is Doug Hoyes, and I'm the co-founder of Hoyes Michaelis & Associates, a company that helps people deal with their debts, often through a consumer proposal or bankruptcy. Guess what the number one reason is that people call our 310 plan helpline? The answer? Yep, calls or letters from collection agents. That's the straw that broke the camel's back for many people. You can owe a lot of money, but as long as you're making your minimum payments, you don't worry about it until you get a call or a letter from a collection agent. That's when you realize you've got a problem and you get on the phone to a company like ours. So how can you deal with collection agents? Can you make a deal with them, or do you just need to go bankrupt and get it over with? How do they work? How do they get paid? What's the deal on collection agencies? To find out, I've invited an actual collection agent on the show, so let's get started. Who are you? Where do you work? And what do you do?
Oh, hi, Doug. My name's Blair Demarco-Wettlaufer. I'm the managing partner for Kingston Data and Credit, a collection agency with 3 branches in Canada.
And one of those branches is here in Cambridge, which is where we're recording this today. So let's start and go through this chronologically.
Sure.
How does a debt get to a collection agency such as yours?
Well, it depends on the size of the creditor. It could be anywhere from Danny the dentist with his handful of accounts that haven't paid him, all the way up to the Bank of Montreal that has a very defined process for assigning files to a collection agency. Typically, they'll come to our office anywhere from 31 days past due all the way to 2 or 3 years past due. And some agencies in our business actually specialize in collecting debt that's 5, 7, or even 10 years past due. But typically, my experience is they'll come to our office about 3 months, 4 months past due, where there's been no activity and the creditors had to throw their hands up and say, we need help.
So the creditor understands, you know what, I'm not going to collect this.
Or they don't have the time to invest in reaching out to people.
And so they send it off to you.
Correct.
You get a list, a file, whatever.
Yeah.
Then what happens? What do you do with that debt? What's your process?
Well, it depends on the client and the province or state we're collecting in. In Ontario, which is probably most of the people listening to this show, what's required by the Collections Agencies Act of Ontario is a file comes in, it gets put into our database, our contact management system, and a collection letter goes out. That's actually required by law. We have to send a letter and wait 6 days before we start calling.
So in every single case, you have to notify the debtor in writing?
Yes, in Ontario.
In Ontario.
Ontario and BC. Now, obviously, if we get a file that's 2 or 3 years past due, we might get no address at all, or an address where mail's been returned, or an address that isn't forwarded anymore. But we still are required by laws written in 1975 to mail out a letter and wait the 6 days.
Okay, so as a practical point here then, if I'm listening to this show and I've got debt and I get a call from a collection agency, I should have already got a letter, or I can at least ask, well, send me something in writing then.
Actually, that's in the Act. If a consumer gets a surprise call from an agency, and obviously Canada Post isn't without its quirks,
Yeah.
And they say, I didn't get a letter, they have the right under the Collection Agencies Act to have that letter resent. They can ask for it by mail. If the consumer and the agency are willing to cooperate, they could email it to them or fax it to them. But the important thing is the consumer has a right to know how much his claim is owed, who the creditor is, what the lawful name of the collection agency is, and the name of the agent reaching out to them. Those are key points that have to be made.
Okay. So you get the file, and the debt could be, like you say, anywhere from 30 days and up in age. The first thing you do is send out a letter.
Right.
And you said you have to wait 6 days?
6 days in Ontario.
And then after that, what happens?
Well, in a typical collection agency, collection agents will either make manual calls where they pick up the phone and punch the buttons on the phone, or they'll work on a predictive dialer, where a predictive dialer will just spit out calls and leave pre-recorded messages or connect to a pool of collectors. I'm very old school. I'm not a big fan of predictive dialers. I think they're brute force engines. So typically what would happen at our office is one of our collection officers would pick up the phone and call somebody and try to reach them. We would call them on a 3 business day turnover. We want to create a sense of urgency and contact the consumer. That's our ultimate goal. A lot of consumers, actually about 60 or 70% of consumers, they play ostrich. They bury their head in the sand. They get a call and they ignore it. Or they get a letter and they disregard it. And that's the biggest challenge, because those are the people who are calling our office a year later saying, I can't get a car. What happened? And they don't realize. So a lot of our efforts on a daily basis are spent reaching consumers, making them aware of the debt, and giving them their options, whether they want to pay it, whether they dispute it, whether it'll be listed to the credit bureau, or in a few rare cases, whether legal action will happen from it.
So we're going to talk about that. So just so I've got the chronology then.
Sure.
So typically, and I realize every situation is different, the file comes in, you send a letter, you wait at least 6 days. And then you start making phone calls. At your agency, you actually pick up a phone and call. Other agencies are using the, like you call the predictive dialers, the robocallers that are banging the phone call out every hour.
Exactly.
Which drives people crazy. I understand that. And then you would typically call someone every 3 days if you don't get
every
through
3
to them?
business days.
That's
right.
That's how you work.
And eventually we'll reach the consumer and make arrangements, or we won't reach the consumer and we'll decide, okay, enough's enough. We'll place it on the person's credit rating and move on.
Okay. So I'm now the debtor. I'm the guy who owes the money.
Sure.
I get a call from a collection agency. So I want your advice on what I should do. And I think there's 2 scenarios. First scenario is I don't actually owe the money. They got the wrong guy. I already paid it, whatever.
Absolutely.
And the second scenario would be, well, yeah, I do owe the money and I guess I got to deal with it. So let's take the first one first. So
sure.
I get a call for a debt that I don't believe is mine. I believe I've paid. I want to dispute it. What should I do?
Well, first of all, you should definitely pick up the phone and talk to the agent and let them know. The problem is a lot of agents aren't educated in the laws, or they're not sophisticated enough to listen because they've been trained to demand the money and throw the excuses to the side. Regardless, you should communicate clearly and effectively that you dispute the debt, why you dispute the debt, and what you want to do. If you can do that verbally, great. It could be an issue of identity theft. My ID was stolen a year ago. I have a police incident report number. Here you go. Give that. Or I've disputed this debt. I have a copy of a letter I sent to Bob the dentist three months ago. I'll send you a copy. Fine. Ultimately, though, if you send a registered letter to the agency disputing the debt and requesting no further calls, they're done.
So I can actually stop you from calling me.
Yes.
By sending you a registered letter.
Yes. You can't stop the consequences, but you can stop the calls.
Right. So, and the consequences obviously in that case would be if I actually do owe the money, then I guess you're going to place it on my credit report. You could return it back to the original creditor who could decide to take me to court and sue me.
A lot of agencies actually have their own internal paralegals and lawyers where they will initiate the legal action. Especially when you're dealing with debts of upwards of $3,000 and more. That's when small claims court becomes viable for the cost. No one is going to sue anyone over a $53 library fine. It's just not going to happen. But if you owe, on your visa $6,000 and you're gainfully employed, yes, the threat of legal action could be real.
And so collection agencies will actually commence lawsuits. It's not your common collection tactic, obviously. It doesn't happen in most cases, I would assume.
It depends on the creditor and the agency. There are some law firms acting as collection agencies, and they sue 30-40% of the accounts that come into their office. Our office will choose a handful of files that we'll take legal action on every year. If the debt's over the 2-year mark, it falls outside the statute of limitations in Ontario. If the person isn't gainfully employed, we don't want to take legal action because it's the creditor throwing good money after bad. If the debt is too small, if it's under $3,000, we generally don't encourage it. And if the client doesn't have ironclad documentation, a signed contract, invoices, then we can't put a case together. So there are a lot of things that have to happen realistically for legal action rather than an emotional agent on the phone saying, I'm going to sue you if you don't pay this.
Right. So what you're saying is if I'm a debtor, the threat of a lawsuit, it might be a real threat, but you just gave us a list of a whole bunch of times where it's not going to happen.
Exactly.
And so you got to kind of understand your rights. So
exactly.
The second part of that question was, what do I do if I actually owe the money and want to make a settlement or a payment arrangement? We're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back and you're going to answer that question right here on Debt Free in 30.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
We're back on Debt Free in 30. My guest today is Blair Demarco-Wettlaufer, who is an actual real-life collection agent. Before the break, we were talking about, if I get a call from a collection agency, what should I do? We talked about the situation where I don't really owe the money and I want to dispute it. Okay, well, what about the more common situation was where, I actually do owe the money. I haven't paid it. I'm behind. That's why I got turned over to a collection agency. What are my options then when I get the call from the collection agent?
Well, there are a couple things you can do. Obviously, if you want to pay it, or you feel you should pay it, or you want to avoid the consequences for non-payment, you should reach back out to the collection agent when you get the letter or you get the answering machine message, and you should be honest. Most agents are motivated to collect the payment in full because they work on a contingency. The company, the collection agency, works on a contingency or commission basis. They only get paid if they collect. And some agents are working in boiler room call centers where they're driven. But you as the consumer, what you should do is make a realistic payment arrangement. You shouldn't promise something that you can't do. You should not promise if you're reaching for that $100 a month payment, don't offer it. Offer 70, offer 50, offer something realistic. From the agent standpoint, the agents often hear every day, "Oh, I want to pay that bill, but I can't. My dog got sick, or I've just lost my job." There are a couple things you can do to negotiate that will get you traction with the agent. The first is, if you want to show the agent that you're serious about taking care of this, you can do what's called a good faith payment in our industry. Let's say you owe $1,000 and you've just lost a job and you're starting a new job in 2 weeks and you want the agency to leave you alone. You can say to the agent, "Bob, I want to take care of this. I can't right now. I have no income currently. I'm going to pay you $50 right now to show my intent, and I will talk to you in 3 weeks." If you actually follow through with that $50 payment, it's not a lot, but it shows the agent you're actually serious. Actions speak louder than words. The other option you can do is, if you want to make arrangements on a balance, you can offer a series of payment arrangements, either through post-dated checks or pre-authorized payments. Be careful with this, though. Make sure that you get your arrangements by email, or you're sending checks that are clearly identified as post-dated, and that they're made out to the right party, to the collection agency's trust account. The last thing you can do is let's say you dispute a portion of the debt, or a portion of the debt is interest that's accumulated over time, or you were unsatisfied with the services. You can offer what's called a settlement, a lump sum settlement, where if you owe $1,000, you're offering to pay $700. Protecting yourself as a consumer in this case is very important. Before you pay one dime, you should get what's called a conditional letter of settlement from the collection agency that says, "On condition of Frank paying $700 by December 5th, he is released from any claim and obligation relative to this debt." And that way, if Frank makes the payment, he is resolved from any demand on the remaining balance. In most provinces, if you make a partial payment on the debt, that acknowledges liability for the full balance. So if you don't get that letter first, if the agent says, "Oh, just pay $700 and we'll make this go away," that doesn't protect the consumer, and the file could be reassigned to another agency a year down the road and interest could accumulate. Always get a settlement letter before you make a settlement amount. There are a number of ways you can negotiate with an agency, but the important thing is to be honest and to only promise what you actually can do.
So I got 2 questions related to that.
Sure.
The first one is, you mentioned in the first segment about the Limitations Act, what they call on TV the Statute of Limitations.
For legal action is 2 years in Ontario.
2 years in Ontario. So that means if I've disappeared off the face of the earth for 2 years, legal action hasn't commenced, well, probably isn't going to, it can't now. That would be my defense in court.
The ship has sailed.
The ship has sailed. So let's say I'm a year and a half into this, and I'm talking to the collection agent, and I do what you said, number one there, make a good faith payment of $50. Well, I've just started the 2-year clock again.
Bingo. The clock resets.
The clock resets.
Absolutely.
Okay. So if I'm going to make a deal, I go back to what you said then, you better make sure you can honor it.
Yes.
Because if I pay that $50, I've now given the collection agent 2 more years to pursue me, in effect.
Exactly. And for credit reporting to the credit bureau, it has a 6-year window in Ontario. That clock resets too with a payment.
So that's pretty dangerous if you aren't going to be able to continue on with it.
So the important thing is to know how much you owe. What are the consequences? Have the consequences been avoided? I mean, a lot of cases, collection agencies aren't sophisticated. They'll list the file on the credit bureau and then call the consumer. To my mind, that's incredibly dumb. It's far better to call the consumer and say, "I haven't put this on the bureau yet. My clients asked me to. What would you like to do?" And consumers react far better to knowing it hasn't been listed with the bureau yet.
So how do you get paid then?
collection agencies work 9 out of 10 times in Canada. Collection agencies work on a contingency basis or a commission basis. They get to keep a portion of what is collected. And this is important for consumers to know because there's this misconception from TV and U.S. news that collection agencies buy the debt. That's very common in the U.S. and it's starting to become common in Canada, but the debt would have to be 2, 3, 4 years old for someone to buy it. In most cases, the creditor retains ownership and hires the collection agency to act on their behalf. And they could receive anywhere between 10% to 50% of the amount they are collecting, depending on the age, balance, and type of creditor.
So if I'm a collection agent and I know that I'm going to collect somewhere between 10 and 50% is my commission, my contingency fee.
Yeah.
I much would rather get a lump sum, which was your third option there that you mentioned. So if it's a $5,000 debt, I'd much rather, as the collection agent, get $2,000 right now or right off the rest, take the money, than I would to get $50 a month for the next 5 years.
A lot of old school agencies work like that. In fact, they'll send out as that initial collection letter, a letter offering a settlement right off the get-go. It's like, Oliver Swift begging on a street corner. Please, sir, could you only pay 700 of the 1,000? I personally believe a lot of consumers end up in collections. They're not bad people. 9 out of 10 consumers ending up in collections are procrastinators. They don't understand their financial rights. They weren't aware of the debt. They've had bad circumstances happen, or they've reacted emotionally to a debt and they've made a bad decision. Most consumers don't have a spare $6,000 in their back pocket. That's why they end up in collections. I personally would rather see a consumer make regular payments for the balance in full where it doesn't strain the consumer rather than pin them up against a wall and ask for a settlement. A lot of, when I started in the business going from a credit manager, collectors had pieces of paper under a glass on their desk and it was called the opening done. And they were told, you owe $10,782. At what point today can we expect payment in full? Which is a shakedown tactic. Mm-hmm. I would far rather a consumer not be sent to borrow funds from friends and family and actually say, well, I've got a limited income. I make $14 an hour. I can pay $100 a month. Is that reasonable? Of course it's reasonable. It's an honest attempt. But a lot of the people in my industry think I'm a little odd.
Gotcha. Well, and I'm kind of an outlier in my industry too. So we're in the same boat there. So, I'm thinking here from a business point of view, if I'm a collection agency, mm-hmm. to take a $50 or $100 payment a month from a debtor, of which I may only be getting $5 or $10 a month.
Yeah.
I've got to take the checks. I got to deposit them. I got to do the accounting. I got to get them in the bank. Some of them are going to bounce. That's a lot of work for not much return.
Our business can be very lean. And there are a lot of hidden costs. We have to carry surety bonds and special insurance in different provinces. We have licensing costs. A lot of agencies fail to grow or fail to deal with volume. But I can tell you, in the last 3 years, 178,000 consumers have been listed with our office.
Wow.
It's mind-boggling. And most of the payments we get are $50, $100, $200 because that's what consumers can afford. And in this day and age, consumers obviously might not want to give out their banking information to a strange collection agency they don't know or trust. We get a lot of e-transfers, Interac e-transfers. We get a lot of people making deposits straight into our trust account. And those small amounts, they add up when you look at thousands of those payments happening a month. Collection agencies exist because of economy of scale. They can hire multiple staff. They can make thousands of calls. They can manage those payments. That's where agencies have an advantage over the original creditor.
So you are willing to accept payments. You're willing to accept deals.
Yeah. From
a consumer's point of view, make sure you understand what you're getting yourself into. Don't promise what you can't do. And it should work out for you.
Yeah. I remember years and years ago, I was doing collections for a municipality that had geared to income housing. And this one poor little old lady, Mrs. Smithers, owed $8,000. And we called her and she was on a CPP, Canada pension, and she offered $100 a month. She couldn't afford $100 a month, so we told her to pay $30. And I'll tell you, she walked into our office with her walker the first day of each month and paid in cash. We never even had to call her. But that's what she was able to do. And because we were reasonable with her, she was reasonable with us. She never missed a payment, ever.
Becomes a win-win for both parties.
Exactly.
Great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you being here today, Blair. We're going to have full show notes on our website at hoys.com. I'll also put links to your blog, which is one of the very few people in your industry who actually has a blog, so it's got some great information. I appreciate you being here today. We'll be back to wrap it up right here on Debt Free in 30.
Thank you, sir.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Welcome back. It's time for the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. My guest today was Blair Demarco-Wettlaufer, a managing partner at a Canadian debt collection agency. He shared with us a great insider's view of the collection world and gave lots of practical tips. He said that under the Collection Agency Act of Ontario, a collection agency must send you a letter once they receive your file, so you're well within your legal rights to request written confirmation of the debt owed. As Blair said, you can't play ostrich with a collection agency. You must take action to deal with your debt. That's the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. So, what's my take on Blair's message? I agree that you can't just ignore a collection agent and hope they'll go away. If a collection agent is calling, you have to deal with it. If you legitimately owe the debt and you have the money to pay it, pay it. If your total debts are manageable and you just need some time, ask to make payments over time. But here's the key. Don't ever make a commitment you can't afford to keep. If you have $50,000 in debts and you're behind on all of them, and a collection agency is calling you daily about your overdue $1,000 cell phone bill, it doesn't make sense to try to pay the $1,000 if you can't deal with the other $49,000. You need a plan to deal with all of your debts, so don't put yourself in a bind by dealing with one debt and ignoring the others. We've got lots of resources on our website at hoyes.com that explains all of your options, and that's a great place to start to make a plan. That's our show for today. Full show notes are available on our website at hoyes.com. That's HOYES.com. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.